They say he was a rabble-rouser, but God sent Fred Shuttlesworth.
He's not afraid of the policeman?
He was the most courageous man I have ever met.
He's not afraid of the judge?
He was convinced that God was directing his path, that God was going to take care of him.
He's not afraid of God because God Almighty says he'll be a friend to him in the time of trouble.
He's my choice of leader. I love Martin, but Shuttlesworth was my choice of leader.
The chosen one, Fred Lee Shuttlesworth, once described as Alabama's greatest and most fearless freedom fighter. Years before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. ever set foot in the civil rights movement taking place in Birmingham, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth faced fire hoses, bombings, threats, and hardcore segregationists. Still, Reverend Shuttlesworth worked relentlessly to integrate schools, register blacks to vote, demonstrate against deep-seated Jim Crow laws in his never-ending nonviolent battle for freedom. But outside of Alabama, few know of Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth's importance to the civil rights movement. But those who do want the world to know about his purpose, his commitment, his passion, and his place in history. Timeless songs reflecting the gospel spirit of civil rights days past. Days the Reverend Fred Lee Shuttlesworth remembers well.
America allowed the South to set up a system illegal by any law, and yet the United States tolerated it.
He's not scared of the mob. He's not afraid of the policeman.
But Reverend Shuttlesworth didn't tolerate it. He used his gift for preaching God's word, his fire of conviction, and his dedication to the civil rights movement to fight for freedom.
I saw myself as having a job to be done. I saw myself as being directed by God and doing God's will.
What he saw was a job that nearly got him killed. In the 1950s and 60s, Shuttlesworth was the civil rights leader in what was considered the most segregated city in the nation, Birmingham. The movement, as the civil rights era is often referred to, saw the involvement of many ministers, but none quite like Fred Shuttlesworth.
No doubt about it. Reverend Fred Lee Shuttlesworth was the anointed leader of the movement in Birmingham, Alabama.
A fearless and complex leader who wasn't afraid to speak his mind.
He was very confrontational, nonviolent, but confrontational. He refused to back down.
My mom used to talk about him in his young days. So he was just into something all the time, you know. And so she said, well, he's going to be something one day.
Shuttlesworth's sister Betty remembering her brother Fred, the oldest of 9 children. He was born in Mount Meigs, Alabama, just outside of Montgomery on March 18, 1922. His grandfather moved the family to Birmingham when Shuttlesworth was 3 years old to get his mother away from Fred's biological father, watchmaker Vetta Green. His mother later told young Fred, the man who raised you is your father. That man was William Nathan Shuttlesworth, a coal miner. The Shuttlesworth family was working class, believed in the Methodist Church, but Fred Shuttlesworth moved to Mobile and was drawn to Baptists. During his growth as a leader, Shuttlesworth graduated from Selma University in 1951 and Alabama State College in 1952. He pastored churches in Mobile, Montgomery, Selma, and then finally Birmingham's Bethel Baptist in 1953, where he found his purpose.
I saw so many men coward, and I asked the Lord to send somebody. And when I met him, I didn't know he was the man.
The chosen man indeed. Fred Shuttlesworth led Birmingham blacks in a time of intimidation, hatred, fear, and violence.
During that time, I think he was seen as kind of a beacon light, a small light maybe during that time. But as time passed, the light grew brighter, and we were able to see much more clearly the strength of this man.
A strength Shuttlesworth would need when he established the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights in 1956. Lola Hendricks was the movement's corresponding secretary.
He was tough. He was tough. Sometimes I had to go out the door. But I know him, yes, he will. He don't take no stuff.
He believed in his cause. He had faith in God, and he feared no man. So he gave us a great sense of courage and commitment.
The federal government has decided that Negro as citizens must be protected from lawlessness and mobocracy.
White segregationists constantly made Reverend Shuttlesworth a target of violence. In September of 1957, 1 week after the integration crisis at Little Rock, Arkansas Central High School, Birmingham saw its own drama unfold. A mob violently beats Reverend Shuttlesworth as he tries to enroll his daughters Frederica and Pat into Birmingham's all-white Phillips High School.
It was such a mob crowd that I didn't want Daddy to get out of the car, but of course, I was screaming and hollering to stay in.
You saw the change. You heard the cursing, the profanities. I mean, they were just like ravenous dogs. They were terrible. They were mean people.
When he got out of the car, it was just complete bedlam. They just yanked him as soon as the door opened and started beating him with chains.
Daddy got back in the car. We went on to the hospital.
Shuttlesworth survives the vicious attack, and later that night he preaches a sermon of nonviolence as he tries to raise money for the movement.
He has gone through so many things, but he just bounces back. You know, he comes back.
Not long after the Phillips beating, Shuttlesworth's organization, the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, files a lawsuit that challenges Alabama school segregation laws. Negro students did finally win the right to desegregate the Birmingham school system in September of 1963. Shuttlesworth was there when 11-year-old Dwight and 10-year-old Floyd enrolled as 6th and 5th graders at Grapemont Elementary. Christmas Eve, 1956, white supremacists bombed Shuttlesworth's home.
It was Friday night when it happened, and the bomb was set between the church and the parsonage and demolished the parsonage.
It was a horrible, horrible night.
The bomb contained 16 sticks of dynamite. Inside were Shuttlesworth, his family, and a deacon who was guarding him.
When the bomb went off, it was just big, loud. I mean, nothing, a deafening sound, big boom.
I knew what it was, knew it was meant for me, and I knew that the dynamite was designed to kill me. But I also knew that I wouldn't get hurt.
Everyone survives the blast. Outside the house, Shuttlesworth spots a police officer who tells them he didn't think they would go that far.
I said, you go back and tell your clan brother, because I knew he was a clanman if he knew the people. Go back and tell your clan brother, and if God could save me through this, I'm here for the duration, and the war is just beginning.
Shuttlesworth's church, Bethel Baptist, was the center of the movement. They met there, strategized there. The office of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights was headquartered at Bethel. Guards actually stood watch at Shuttlesworth's home and church 24 hours a day. But that didn't stop hatred from bombing Bethel for a second time in June of 1958.
Reverend Shuttlesworth had problems with a lot of other ministers. There was no question about that, because they was afraid. But after this church was bombed, that Saturday, we cleaned up the church. That Sunday morning, when senior members started to come to the church, I knew then all fear was gone.
Shuttlesworth helps them overcome the fear of intimidation, a tactic the Klan used to keep Birmingham segregated. They tried intimidating Shuttlesworth with jail time. Police jailed him 19 times. His rap sheet, or arrest record, included everything from disorderly conduct to unlawful assembly to parading without a permit, even speeding. But this man, a small statue, 5 feet 6 inches tall, but of big heart, was not afraid.
He was a courageous leader. I don't believe he was really afraid of anything. The tougher things got with him, looked like he enjoyed it.
Birmingham blacks were not only jailed and bombed with sticks of dynamite, they faced explosions of racism, tormented by police dogs, fire hoses, and mobs. But Reverend Shuttlesworth never sent anyone into the fire of hatred alone. He led by example, and in turn, many people believed in his commitment. But there are times his style of leadership came under fire.
He's not scared of the mob. He's not afraid of the policeman. He's not afraid of the judge.
Fred, in his approach, was not as diplomatic as some thought he should be. And certainly he was not eloquent as King, and he was not as patient, you know. But he had a following.
His following was strong. Many considered Shuttlesworth fearless in the battle for freedom, but some thought it was fearless to the point of insanity.
None of us are perfect. One local pastor withdrew from the movement, and he withdrew from the movement and said that he was withdrawing because Fred was a dictator, and that he wasn't going to be dictated to.
Not even Shuttlesworth denies that he was temperamental at times.
People call me a dictator. Well, you know how I fix that? Know how I fix that? I say, if I'm a dictator, I'm a benevolent dictator.
Aggressiveness was just a part of Fred Shuttlesworth's style. Just ask his son, Fred Jr., who refers to his father as Rev.
You don't want to have Rev as your leader all the time. The Rev's a hard taskmaster is the word we have to use. That's why he's so successful. That's why I respect him so much.
Respect is what Shuttlesworth commanded, whether you agreed or disagreed with his methods.
I was very much aware of Reverend Shuttlesworth, had an opportunity to hear him speak at the church many times at the mass meetings. To me, he was a symbol of all of the things that we were struggling for in our community.
I think it would be correct to say he is a truly charismatic figure, and that he did provide the energy and the focus for what became a movement that was, to a large extent, his creation and dependent upon him for its coherence.
Most would agree that Shuttlesworth's commitment was unshakable. He truly believed that God had called on him to lead the civil rights movement in Birmingham. And no matter what others thought, Shuttlesworth refused to give up his battle.
I knew I was right. Why would God save me? I don't have a kingdom. I don't have an earth. But people flocked to me.
Black people had been under a spell of fear for 300 years. And Reverend Shuttlesworth eliminated that fear.
Reverend Shuttlesworth and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. worked together in the civil rights movement. When The Chosen One continues, a look at the complex relationship between Shuttlesworth and King. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth were often referred to as the Big Three civil rights leaders. But how could these men with different philosophies, different organizations, and methods work together to advocate racial justice in Birmingham? For example, King disagreed with Shuttlesworth's use of children in the demonstrations. Yet the two men respected each other and worked together, trying to accomplish the same goal.
One day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
Great orator, and he spoke the truth, and he spoke in God's line. So that makes him great whether you like it or not. I never was jealous of Martin's education or anything. I just felt like we were designed to use. We were different, and yet we were together in that.
My 4 little children will one day live in a nation.
King appealed to the middle class, smooth and eloquent. Shuttlesworth spoke the language of the working class, sometimes radical and confrontational. Both preached nonviolence.
I was fighting here 7 years before Martin came to Birmingham, and went mostly unnoticed.
That changed after Shuttlesworth met King in 1954. In 1957, he joined King in forming the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, and King supported Shuttlesworth's organization.
Reverend Shuttlesworth asked him, would you come? We do not have a staff. He said, but you do. Can you bring them over and help us get this thing going?
King responded by sending SCLC staff members to work with the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. But Shuttlesworth and King weren't always on the same page.
I said, Martin, if you was in Birmingham where I was around the Klan, you wouldn't be alive because the Klan gets you, you got to move. He said, Fred, you're always in a hurry. I said, that's right. He said, but Fred, brevity is not a virtue. I said, Martin, you're grievously vexing my nonviolence. What little I got. It's the truth.
The truth is, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. needed Reverend Fred Lee Shuttlesworth, and Reverend Shuttlesworth needed Dr. King.
He was just brilliant at shaping national opinion, conveying the plight of his people to the public at large. Shuttlesworth really wasn't interested in that. He was interested in, throwing his head and his body and soul against the barricades, and that's what he was brilliant at.
Shuttlesworth was mainly a local figure, organizing lunch counter sit-ins, registering blacks to vote, leading mass demonstrations against segregation. King's national spotlight brought attention to Birmingham's battle.
I think they each brought different things to the table. Martin King was known all over the world, and I think his name brought some attention to the movement here in Birmingham for sure. I think that Reverend Shuttlesworth provided much of the energy, the strategy, and again, setting the tone of confrontation, not backing down, guts, if you will.
When King came in, he made special appeal to the ministers, and because of his popularity from the Montgomery bus boycott.
I think of it as Fred Shuttlesworth, in a way, coming in and providing backbone at times when Dr. King acknowledged himself or was described by others as not knowing where to go or where to turn.
Shuttlesworth says his invitation to King included 3 rules.
I said, number 1, you and Ralph and I are supposed to meet. And these are what the 3 were. I wish I had written them down now. Every morning, about 10 minutes, we meet together so the people who were under us would be sure that we were together.
Shuttlesworth wanted the 3 to be on one accord.
That we were to make joint statements. See, if that had been followed through, but Martin never fulfilled it. And I don't know whether he was just saying yes to come and to go. But the letter from the Birmingham deal, everything was supposed to have been that way.
And third, Reverend Shuttlesworth told Dr. King federal and state injunctions against demonstrations would be violated so that the movement wouldn't lose momentum.
There's those 3 things. And really none of them were fully carried out, but we're men, not angels.
The Birmingham police force routinely brutalized Negroes. That's just the way things were in Birmingham. But Shuttlesworth stood up to police. His relationship with Bull Connor was a classic battle.
If it hadn't been for a man named Bull Connor, I wouldn't know as much as I know about Jesus Christ.
Eugene Bull Connor was Birmingham's infamous police commissioner, elected twice, serving once for 16 years from the 1930s into the 1940s. Pushing a platform of racial hatred, Bull reemerged in 1958.
Because I just think that he didn't understand his opportunity to lift this city. He got so caught up till he said, Birmingham may become a dead city. It will never become an integrated city.
Bull Connor wore different hats. The former sports broadcaster was also a Sunday school teacher. He got the name Bull because of the resonance of his voice.
Bull Connor was a tough guy. He was something just like a mad dog.
Protecting Shuttlesworth was Colonel Stone Johnson's #1 priority. Shuttlesworth talked about a time Colonel Johnson started his car for him just in case it had been rigged with a bomb.
He said, well, if I get killed, it don't make no difference. But if you get killed, it makes all the difference.
Once upon a time, we had to have 3 cars. He put him in one car and stop him, take him out, and put him in another.
Movement volunteers watched Shuttlesworth's home. They guarded the church, even shielded Shuttlesworth's children.
We had curfews. We couldn't go beyond the yard, and we couldn't be out past a certain time. And if we went anywhere, we had to be an accomplice. Somebody else had to go with us.
But despite the intimidation, the arrests, the battle for justice, Reverend Shuttlesworth says he didn't hold grudges against Bull Connor.
I have a saying that I don't use it much because I don't want to let folk think I'm loving Bull or praise him. I've forgiven Bull Connor for what he's done for me, to me, or even for me.
In the height of the movement, Shuttlesworth makes a difficult decision. He leaves Birmingham and heads north. The Chosen One, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth's story continues after a break. In the height of the civil rights movement, nearly 2 years before the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church that killed 4 little girls, Reverend Shuttlesworth leaves Birmingham. He accepts a position as pastor of Revelation Baptist in Cincinnati. By that time, Reverend Shuttlesworth has made a name for himself. One television report calls him the man most feared by Southern racists. But although Shuttlesworth moves north, he really never leaves behind his home in the Deep South. This is the Cincinnati of today, more than 4 decades after Shuttlesworth moved to this city.
There was some sadness inside the movement when he decided to take the church in Cincinnati in 1961 because Alabama at that point was sort of the only game going in the civil rights establishment.
Shuttlesworth says moving to Cincinnati was an accident.
My heart, my whole soul and spirit was in Birmingham, Alabama, and what I was doing. I was committed to killing segregation, even if I had died in the process. And I wasn't going to let anything get me off from that. And I regret it, actually, that I had gotten into that. And some things you can't explain, and that's how I got here.
Birmingham's Bethel Baptist was a small church and couldn't afford to pay very much. Still, those in the movement didn't want to see Shuttlesworth leave Birmingham.
I told him personally, I thought his leaving Birmingham that he was deserting the movement, but he assured me that he wasn't.
He had to take care of his family, and they were school ages, and there was better jobs for him, but yet he still came to Birmingham just like he stayed here every night.
Reverend Shuttlesworth did come back often. He continued to work with Dr. King in the movement, like on this day in May of 1963. Shuttlesworth, King, and Abernathy at the A.G. Gaston Motel announcing the Birmingham truce. It had 4 points: desegregation of lunch counters, restrooms, drinking fountains, and stages of 90 days, better job opportunities for Negroes, release jail demonstrators on bond, and the promise of continued communication between whites and Negroes.
May get dangers on the ship, but stay in the church.
By 1966, Shuttlesworth had left Cincinnati's Revelation Baptist and took over as pastor of Greater New Life Baptist Church.
I didn't see him as much in my childhood because the world needed him. And I don't regret it because I have him now.
It was Reverend Shuttlesworth's wife, Ruby, who held the family together.
My mom always told us that, he was doing a lot for everybody, and he was in a lot of stress, and he had to think a lot, and things that we could help him out with, she wanted us to do it.
Ruby Shuttlesworth, a trained nurse, understood her husband's passion, his commitment. She too worked in the movement. During their time in Birmingham, she served as youth director of the church. She refused to stay safely in the car on that awful day Shuttlesworth was beaten outside Phillips High School.
And he tried to keep my mom in there, but she was trying to get out to help him to get back in the car. And it's when she got stabbed in the hip. And I think she was so busy trying to get him back, she didn't even know that she was stabbed. She didn't feel it till later.
Later, the family would feel the loss of Ruby when she died in 1971 of a heart attack. But Reverend Shuttlesworth still pressed on, traveling on the road between Cincinnati and Birmingham. Shuttlesworth demonstrated his own brand of charisma. When you talk to those who know him, people who work with him, or those who studied the accounts of his life, you learn of a man who was considered crazy, offensive, even sometimes hard to work with. But all would tell you he was totally committed to nonviolent agitation for equality. Shuttlesworth said, "I lived in a hard town, so God gave me a hard head." The chosen one was no doubt the right man at the right time.
Singing does something to the spirit, it lifts the spirit, even if dogs and fire hoses out there. And it shakes up your faith, it stirs it up, it generates momentum.
A momentum that Shuttlesworth says was supposed to be more evolutionary than revolutionary. That's why he tries to pass on his fight for equality to the young. It's a battle that Shuttlesworth considers is far from over.
We have a very long way to go because we got the signs down, but we haven't gotten the openness of heart that we need to have integration.
Shuttlesworth says he never expected to live past the age of 40. He thought the Klan would have killed him long ago. Even at the age of 81, he still has the fire to preach a passionate sermon.
They used to say, "Get on board! Oh, ship of Zion!"
Shuttlesworth takes that fire from the pulpit to his travels across the country. He got quite upset when the statue of him outside the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute originally showed him with a fist.
I wanted it like this, where blacks always had their hands out to white, and I think that's the way it ought to be. A handshake, brother, is better than a fist.
Right. Right, that's confrontational.
That's confrontation, and we had to confront it, but not fighting each other.
As more people learn of what Reverend Shuttlesworth accomplished during the movement, history is being rewritten.
There's been this sort of sense that, you know, King was the only game in town for a while, and in recent years there's been a correction to that. It doesn't serve the movement well, and it doesn't serve the current generation of young African Americans or black leaders to think that this was done by one man.
Shuttlesworth doesn't seek recognition. He leaves that in the hand of God. Yet historians will tell you he deserves far more than an honorable mention.
He was the absolutely indispensable figure for the civil rights movement in Birmingham.
Reverend Shuttlesworth is the man the movement chose, a man who chose not to ignore his calling. The question now is how history will remember the Reverend Fred Lee Shuttlesworth.
I don't really know how I want them to remember me. A person who, I think Ralph said he tried, and Martin said he wanted to be a drum major. Well, if I had to coin up one, I said, the man who tried to live his best until he died, something like that. I may change it now, remember? I may think of something like that.
But if you change it, you got to tell me about it.
I will do that.
For a man who tried to live...
Who tried to live his best until he died.
Hopefully the dreams of the chosen one, Reverend Fred Lee Shuttlesworth, will never die. Thanks for watching. Maybe now you have a better understanding of Shuttlesworth's place in history. I'm Art Franklin. Good night.